Melina is the Gloam-Eyed Queen. This has been a theory floated around the community since Elden Ring's first release, but with the recent release of the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, not only do I feel more confident than ever in this theory, I think it may go a step beyond Melina just being the Gloam-Eyed Queen, thanks to some recent revelations revolving around Queen Marica herself. I think Melina is Destined Death itself. That may sound a bit crazy coming out the gate, but I promise there's more to it than just speculation. A lot of it is speculation, though. This theory for me began not with Melina, not really even Marica, but with Radagon. Though I guess you could argue Radagon is Marica, so I guess it started with Marica, but like, you get the point. It always struck me as really weird that Rennala was not only the only non-demigod to have a Great Rune herself, and not just any Great Rune, but the Rune of the Unborn, which is a rune that, quote, perfects those who have been born anew, and was gifted to her by her now ex-husband Radagon. My question has always been, why? Like, why did Radagon, who for all intents and purposes at this point in the timeline shouldn't have access to the Elden Ring, not only have a Great Rune, but give it away to Rennala as he returned to Marica after Godfrey left? And then the DLC came out, and the Lore of the Shamans came out. In case anyone's unfamiliar, Marica comes from a people known as the Shamans, whom one item description describes as having flesh that harmoniously merges with others. Couple this with the revelation of what it takes for one to ascend to Godhood, aka shirking off one's earthly self in order to ascend via the gates of divinity, and it's here that the theory really came into being for me. During our time in the DLC, we can come across Miquella's other self, Saint Trina, born from the abandonment of Miquella's love. She's an entire person born from the mere aspect of Miquella. And as we're shown throughout our time in the Shadowlands, Miquella and Marica's journeys are explicit mirrors of one another, as we as the players are meant to draw parallels between the two. So, come back to the main game, we're in the final boss fight with Radagon, who we can see the Elden Ring sits within the very being of, their body being a literal vessel to house the Elden Ring. As such, I believe maybe Radagon was created as Marica acquired the Elden Ring and utilized the Rune of the Unborn to reinvent herself, shedding off not only the Rune of the Unborn in the process, but perhaps even the aspects of herself that she'd come to despise, like red flowing locks of the giants, which is speculated to be quote-unquote a curse of their kind, and the very locks that Radagon himself hated. If the loss of something as conceptual as one's love, as seen with Saint Trina and Miquella, or potentially the loss of one's dignity, as seen with Millicent in relation to Melina, then the shedding of a great rune would likely be far more than enough to bring about the creation of a new person entirely, and thus comes my theory of Melina's origins. For the longest time, people had theorized that Melina had to be the third child of Radagon and Marica, as it would align well with the other three children of both, being Godwyn, Mogan, Morgott, and Radahn, Ranni, and Rykard. That, coupled with the Aeonian Butterfly, Nascent Butterfly, and Smoldering Butterfly, it seemed that evidence alluded to Melina being born into said trio. And I think that's probably still the case, but we also have Mesmer now, and his butterfly, the Black Pyre Butterfly, which kind of throws things out of whack with that theory, as we know Mesmer has to be one of the oldest demigods, if not the oldest, due to Gaius' remembrance describing him as like an elder brother to Radahn, and with Melina being alluded to as Mesmer's younger sister and Mesmer's kindling, she could truly fall anywhere on the family tree. I should note, though, that the butterflies could be implying that these are the children that were born from when Marica was whole, as we see Mesmer may have been born before Marica and Radagon separated, and could possibly be the reason they separated in the first place, because of, the whole cursed aspect. And Melina could have been born alongside Melina and Miquella once Marica had come back together with Radagon, which I think is fairly possible. My belief is Melina was actually born between the transitional period between Godfrey leaving the Lands Between on the Long March of the Tarnished and Radagon being called back to Marica, if not as soon as Radagon and Marica came back together. It's during this time, I believe, that Marica had yet to fully ascend to godhood, and she intended to use Radagon as her consort in order to give herself complete control over her own order, as she and Radagon are one and the same. But before Radagon's return, Marica had one more adjustment she wished to make to the Elden Ring, and that was the removal of death. What was always strange to me is the fact that not only had the Gloam-Eyed Queen been described as an Empyrean, but also described as wielding Destined Death, something that should have only been possible if she either had access to the Elden Ring or had stolen a fragment of the Rune of Death, yet the only time we see that happening is during the Night of Black Knives. It's never mentioned anywhere else. Couple this with the fact that we see Miquella abandon his Great Rune at the base of the Erdtree, and Melina tells us she was born at the base of the Erdtree, it makes me feel like we're meant to draw parallels between Miquella's abandonment of his Great Rune and Melina's birth at the foot of the Erdtree, of which she's only ever described herself as having a mother, never mentioning a father. I believe that Marica plucked the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring at the base of the Erdtree in order to finalize what would become the Golden Order upon her ascension to godhood. From this rune, Melina would be born, and being born from a Great Rune itself, as well as from only one quote-unquote god, even though at the time she'd be an Empyrean, she too bore the title of Empyrean. It's also possible that perhaps she was influenced by an outer god, as we know the Deathbirds come from an outer god of death, and the seal on Melina's eye is fairly similar to a bird's talon. From there, we know that Melina bore visions of the Erdtree's destruction, as Mesmer's kindling informs us of such. And, with the Rune of Death at her side, she had the means with which to go through with this. It appears to me there's evidence that Melina's intent to tear down the order her mother was building towards was discovered, as we find her Blade of Calling in an Inquisitor's office. I believe while being interrogated by the Inquisition, her plans to overthrow Marica were made known, with Melina killing the Inquisitor and abandoning her blade in the office, as we find both the blade and the official's attire on a corpse just outside the office. Then, she would head into the Forbidden Lands, and more specifically Farum Azula. I believe it is here that Melina decided to align herself with Placidusax and take him on as her Elden Lord. We have both Godfrey and Placidusax claiming the title of First Elden Lord, but up until this point, we'd never had a god to pair Placidusax with that he could be Elden Lord beneath. That is, unless you consider the fact that in order to ascend to godhood, you need to find a lord for said ritual. And we see with Melania and Miquella, two of the other Empyreans, they're either already referred to as gods before their ascension, as seen with Melania's second phase being referred to as the goddess of rot, or as being godlike, with Miquella being said to have the allure of a god. Couple this with the fact that Melina is aware of how to get to Farum Azula in the first place, and within Farum Azula, we fight the Godskin duo, who are described as serving Destined Death specifically in the Godskin Apostle robe description. Additionally, even though it's called the Godskin quote-unquote duo boss fight, the room is seemingly capable of endlessly bearing Godskin within it, who are tied to the Gloam-Eyed Queen via their many descriptions. So I believe there's an argument to be made that the Gloam-Eyed Queen and Placidusax were allied together and were likely challenging the Erdtree. This would then give us a potential explanation as to why the dragons attacked Leyndell in the first place, as we never receive a solid answer in game. If their lord Placidusax commanded it alongside his Empyrean, the Gloam-Eyed Queen, it finally gives us a motive as to why this war began in the first place beyond, it's a FromSoft game, so a dragon war has to happen, you know? With the dragons besieging Leyndell and Marica preparing to ascend to godhood, Melina would then come face to face with Malekith, who would defeat her and claim the Rune of Death, sealing it away. Melina, like her brother and half-sister would soon come to experience as well, would die a half-death, coming to exist purely in spirit after being burnt by the flames of Destined Death that Malekith now wields. With death sealed, so too is her remaining Gloam Eye, as well as her other eye being removed and replaced with an iris of grace like her elder brother Mesmer, in hopes of banishing these thoughts of flame. But this is Melina's very being. Born of death and bearing visions of flame, these both being taken from her would strip her completely of her identity, manifesting as amnesia within the spirit, and thus she would remain as such until her mother would come to understand what these visions of fire truly meant, and would call upon her daughter once more to fulfill the purpose she once waged war against her mother to achieve. And should the day come where she is not made kindling for the Erdtree's burning, and instead a Lord of Frenzied Flame arises, with death unsealed, so too is Melina's former self fully realized, as the Iris of Grace formerly placed upon her fades with the death of her mother, alongside death's release, unsealing the gloam eye that was once sealed shut. As a Lord of Frenzied Flame arises, a Queen too rises from the ash to deliver the death to those who abuse it. And yeah, that's the theory. Does it rely kind of heavily on speculation? Yeah, but I think there's enough substantial evidence to make a fairly compelling argument with the DLC coming out, in my eyes at least. I'd love to hear other opinions, though, on the matter. If you have something that maybe I overlooked or forgot, or you have other insight that you'd like to share, or your own theories, please let me know in the comments below. I'd love to read them. I love talking about this game, so any chance I get to read more speculation, I absolutely adore. But either way, that's the end of the video. Thanks for hearing me out. I'll see you when I see you. Goodbye!